I have stood beside 3 graves in my life. My father's, who died the way he lived, quietly, without complaint, in his favorite chair with a cold cup of tea beside him, and the radio still murmuring the cricket scores. My wife Beatrice's, who fought cancer for 2 years with a kind of calm, royal stubbornness that made every consultant at St. Thomas's feel personally defeated. And my son's, except my son was not dead, and I was the only man in that church who knew it. Welcome back to Dad's Quiet Revenge. Get comfortable, pour something warm, and remember this: most people are not destroyed by enemies. They are destroyed by the moment they think no one is listening. My name is Malcolm Wren. I am 68 years old. I have a ruined right shoulder, a respectable Scotch collection, and what my late wife once called the face of a man who could watch a house burn and still ask for the receipt. That face served me well on a Thursday morning in November, inside St. Alden's church in London, where I sat in the front pew wearing the black wool suit Beatrice had bought me for her own funeral. 200 people were crying over my son's coffin. The coffin was not empty. Inside it was a microphone no larger than a cufflink. And beneath the satin lining, behind all that polished oak and false finality, was my son Oliver. Alive, breathing, listening. But I am moving too quickly. Let me tell you about Oliver. Oliver Wren was 39 years old. Tall, composed, irritatingly handsome in that quiet English way that makes waiters trust you and bankers return your calls. He built Wrenbridge Capital from 2 rented rooms near Holborn into a private investment firm managing a little over £320 million in client assets. He did it in 12 years. He did it cleanly. That mattered to him. It mattered to me, too. He called me every Sunday morning at 7:20. Not 7:30, not 7:15, 7:20. Oliver had inherited his mother's affection and my obsession with timing, which made him both loving and unbearable. We would talk for 40 minutes about ordinary things: football, rain, repairs needed on my roof in Richmond, whether my neighbor's dog was getting louder or I was getting older. Those calls were the best part of my week. 9 months before the funeral, those calls changed. Not enough that another person would notice. Oliver was too disciplined for obvious distress. But I knew him. You know your child the way you know a room in the dark. You do not need the lights on to feel that something has moved. Then one Sunday he called at 6:05. "Dad," he said, "I need to come over." No greeting, no joke, no mention of the weather. That was how I knew. He arrived 40 minutes later, sat at my kitchen table in Richmond, and placed a brown folder in front of me. He had not touched the coffee I made him. That frightened me more than the folder. "How long?" I asked after reading the first page. "5 months confirmed," he said. "Possibly 7. "Lydia?" I asked. He nodded once. Lydia was my daughter-in-law. I had never trusted her. That was not because she married my son. I want to be fair about that. I never disliked Lydia because she was beautiful or polished or because Oliver loved her more openly than I thought wise. I disliked her because she performed emotion. Some people smile because they feel warmth. Lydia smiled because warmth was useful. She touched your arm at the correct moments. She asked questions that sounded intimate and never listened to the answers. Her grief, joy, concern, surprise, all of it arrived half a beat late, like a well-trained actress waiting for her cue. Oliver loved her anyway. Good men often love dangerous women because they mistake stillness for depth. The man in the folder was Theo Brandt, 36, private financier, educated, expensive, and built entirely out of appetite. He had been moving money through Lydia into a Jersey company with a name so bland it was almost insulting. Oliver had tracked the transfers himself, quietly, alone, the way Wren men handle disasters before admitting they are disasters. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" I asked. He looked at me then, and for 1 second he was not the polished founder of Wrenbridge Capital. He was my boy again, 10 years old, bleeding from the knee after falling off his bicycle, refusing to cry until he thought I had turned away. I needed to be sure, he said. Once I said it out loud, it became real. I put my hand over his. We sat there for a while. Then I said, "All right. What is the plan?" My son looked at me. For the first time that morning, he almost smiled. "I'm going to need you," he said, "to come to my funeral. I want you to understand the particular experience of watching your son plan his own death. It is not something a father should have to do. Oliver designed everything over 3 weeks with the help of 3 people. His solicitor, Priya Mehta, a woman with a voice like folded steel and the unsettling calm of someone who has never once lost an argument she cared about. His old university friend, Dr. Julian Reed, who understood the medical side of the performance and explained it to me only in broad terms because I told him plainly I did not want details. And Edwin Sallow, a funeral director in Chelsea whose family had buried half of London's respectable dead and who accepted the situation with the grave professionalism of a man who had seen enough grief to no longer be surprised by its cousins. I will not describe the mechanics. That is not the point. The point is this. Oliver needed Lydia and Theo to believe he was gone. He already had records, transfers, messages, corporate filings, enough to start a case, not enough to end one. People like Theo do not confess in interviews. They confess when they think they have won. "They'll speak," Oliver told me 3 days before the service. "He won't be able to help himself." "You know him that well?" Oliver looked toward the window. "I know men who confuse cruelty with intelligence." My role was simple. Sit in the front pew, look broken, do not interfere. I practiced twice in the mirror and then stopped because, frankly, I had already survived university budget meetings, a prostate biopsy, and one Christmas dinner where Beatrice's sister brought a man who described cryptocurrency as spiritual infrastructure. I could sit still and look devastated. I had range. The service began at 11. St. Alden's was full by 10:45. Oliver had been liked, truly liked. Not loudly, not theatrically, but in the way decent men are liked by people who have done business with them and found no knife waiting under the handshake. There were clients, colleagues, neighbors, old school friends, 2 women from his favorite bookshop, and a man from the cafe near his office who cried harder than several relatives. I later learned Oliver had been quietly paying his daughter's university fees for 18 months. That discovery nearly undid me. The fake funeral had not. That did. Lydia sat 2 seats away from me, dressed in black so precisely mournful it could have been invoiced. She cried during the hymn. She held Oliver's cousin Ruth by the hand. She pressed a tissue to her mouth at the exact moment everyone looked toward her. I will give Lydia this. She was committed to the role. Theo Brandt sat 5 rows back. Dark suit, lowered eyes, perfectly arranged sorrow, the posture of a man pretending to be a distant acquaintance while believing himself essential to the story. He caught my eye once. He gave me a solemn nod. I nodded back and thought, enjoy the next quarter hour. The service ended at 12:35. The receiving line moved slowly. People held my hand and said the things people say when death makes language useless. He was too young. He was one of the good ones. You must be so proud. If there is anything at all. I accepted each sentence with the exhausted dignity of a man whose only child was apparently resting in a box 6 feet away. Then the crowd thinned. Only family remained. Lydia, her sister Marianne, Oliver's cousin Ruth, my brother-in-law Peter, who smelled strongly of peppermint lozenges and old raincoat, and Theo Brandt, who had somehow drifted forward into the intimate circle with the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to entering rooms that had not invited him. I stood beside the coffin. My hand rested on the lid. I spoke softly to my son, because grieving fathers do that. Even when the son inside the coffin is listening and, knowing Oliver, silently judging the acoustics. I felt Theo before I heard him. A shift in the air, a trace of expensive cologne. Then his voice at my shoulder, low enough to be private and cruel enough to need privacy. "Don't worry, old man," he said. "I'll spend his pounds better than he did." I kept my hand on the coffin. I kept my eyes forward. I counted to 3. And then, from inside the polished oak coffin, in the absolute silence of St. Alden's church, my son coughed. Not dramatically, not like a film. A small, sharp, involuntary cough, the kind produced by a man whose patience had failed before the plan had. Theo stopped breathing. I smiled. Not much, just enough. "Theo," I said quietly, still looking at the coffin, "you may want to remain exactly where you are. If you are still listening, take a second and subscribe." Stories like this do not happen because people are evil once. They happen because they are given chance after chance to stop, and they keep choosing themselves. There is a kind of panic that makes noise. It shouts. It drops glasses. It knocks over chairs. That is ordinary panic. What passed through Theo Brandt after my son coughed from inside his own coffin was not ordinary. It was the quiet kind, the kind that freezes the face first, the kind that begins behind the ribs and travels outward until even the hands forget what they were meant to do. He did not scream. He did not run. He simply ceased to be the man he had been pretending to be. Then the coffin lid moved. I have replayed this moment in my mind more times than is healthy for a man my age. The lid did not fly open. Oliver would never permit anything so undignified. It rose slowly, an inch, then 4, then fully. My son sat up in his own coffin at 12:47 on a Thursday afternoon, wearing a dark suit, pale but composed, his hair slightly flattened at the back, which I knew would annoy him later. His eyes found Theo first, not with anger, with attention. That was worse. Marianne screamed. Peter said something no man should say inside a church, then looked toward the altar and whispered, "Apologies." Ruth began crying and laughing at the same time. Lydia stood completely still. Her face changed in a way I had never seen before. The performance collapsed. All the small, elegant structures she had built over 6 years fell at once. What remained was not grief, not love, not even fear. Calculation. Cold, rapid calculation. Oliver looked at her for 2 seconds, long enough to confirm what he already knew. Then he looked away. That was when I understood something had ended in him. Not loudly, but permanently. Dr. Reed appeared from the side chapel and helped him step out of the coffin. Oliver straightened his jacket. He looked at me. "Hello, Dad," he said. I looked at my son alive in front of me, and something warm passed through my chest with such force my bad shoulder stopped aching for the first time in 8 years. "You're early," I said. He gave me a look. He said what he said. I heard what he said. "So you understand. I understand you have no self-control. I was in a coffin. I was aware." He almost smiled. Then he turned back to Theo. The room had entered that peculiar silence that belongs only to people trying to make reality behave and failing. Theo had not moved. I will give him that much. A smaller man would have run. Theo had enough survival instinct to understand running would be a confession with legs. So he stood still and tried to look innocent. It did not suit him. Oliver walked toward him slowly. No violence, no raised voice, just control. That was Oliver's gift. He made calm feel like a locked door. "Theo," he said. Theo said nothing. "You look as if you've seen a ghost." Still nothing. "That is fine," Oliver said. "You don't need to say anything now. You said enough a few minutes ago." He tilted his head. Into the microphone. Theo's face lost its color so completely that Dr. Reed gave him a brief professional look. "I don't know what this is," Theo managed. "The satin lining," Oliver said. "Left side. Excellent reception, apparently. Priya chose it. She has always had better taste than I do." As if called by her name, Priya Mehta entered through the side door. Dark coat, calm face, leather case under one arm. Behind her came two officers from the Economic Crime Unit, both wearing the plain, steady expressions of people who had already decided which exit mattered. No one rushed. No one needed to. Theo looked at them, then at Oliver, then at the doors. "I would not," I said. He turned toward me. That was when I saw the last part of him collapse, the final understanding. He had not been trapped by emotion. He had been processed. Priya placed her case on the front pew and opened it. "Theo Brandt," she said. "The authorities have already received the financial evidence relating to the Jersey entity, the Isle of Man accounts, and the brokerage account opened under your mother's maiden name." She removed another set of papers. "There is also the matter of the £286,000 moved in September, which your solicitor will explain has made your position significantly less comfortable." Theo stared at the papers. Priya continued, "You may choose to cooperate, or you may choose to maintain your current expression of injured confusion. I have seen both strategies. One works better than the other." Theo turned to Lydia. That was the moment I had not expected. The look he gave her was not partnership. It was not love. It was not even betrayal. It was discovery. He had just realized he was alone. "Lydia," he said, "call Graham." Lydia looked at him for a long moment. Then she opened her handbag, took out her phone, and dialed. Not Graham. Oliver watched her. Something passed through his eyes. Not victory. Something quieter. Sadder. "She is calling her own solicitor," Priya said softly beside him. "Separate representation. As agreed." "As agreed?" I asked. Priya looked at me with the face solicitors use when civilians step too close to sealed rooms. Oliver spoke before she could. "Dad, I am only asking. I know what you are asking. She is not pregnant." The words entered the church and settled there. I stopped. Oliver did not look at me. He was still watching Lydia. "She told me 4 months ago," he said. "That was the first lie that mattered. Before I found the transfers, before Theo, she told me she was pregnant." His voice did not break. That made it worse. I wanted to believe it. I did everything a man does when he believes he is about to become a father. Then I found out there was no child. There had never been one. He swallowed once. It was a way to keep me still. I stood beside my son in the church where we had staged his death and thought of Beatrice, of Sunday morning calls, of all the ways a person can be used by someone they love. I put my hand on Oliver's arm. He covered it briefly with his own. Then he let go. Theo was taken out at 1:18. At the door, he looked back. I do not know what he wanted. Mercy, perhaps, or a version of the story in which he had not leaned over a grieving father and revealed himself. Oliver watched him calmly. Then my son said clearly and without malice, "I hope you spend the next few years thinking about what you actually wanted, Theo, because it was not money. People who truly want money are usually more careful." Theo said nothing. "Whatever it was," Oliver said, "I hope you name it." The doors closed. The church breathed again. Peter, still seated heavily in the second pew, cleared his throat. "Is anyone going to explain," he said carefully, "what in God's patient creation I just witnessed?" Ruth, still crying, put a hand on his shoulder. "Not quickly," she said. I found Oliver alone by the coffin 20 minutes later. The church had emptied. Priya was making calls near the vestibule. Dr. Reed had taken the family across the street for tea because British people will process even resurrection better with tea. Oliver stood with one hand resting on the coffin lid. almost exactly as I had. I stood beside him. Neither of us spoke for a while. "How do you feel?" I asked. He considered the question honestly. That was one thing I had taught him. "Like I spent 6 hours in a box," he said. "You did." "Yes." A pause. "And like I have put something down." I nodded. "I know that feeling." He looked at the coffin. "I thought I would feel better." "You will feel many things," I said. "Better may be one of them. It may not arrive first." He nodded. We stood there in the quiet church, father and son, beside the object that had held the end of one life and the beginning of another. "Sunday," I said. He glanced at me. 7:20, you call." "Dad, I do not care what Priya schedules. I do not care what statements need signing. I do not care if the Crown itself asks you to breakfast. Sunday, 7:20. My son looked at me with Beatrice's eyes and my jaw. "Fine," he said quietly. "I'll call. If you want more stories about family, betrayal, money, and the quiet ways people finally answer for what they have done, subscribe. Not every revenge looks like fire. Sometimes it sounds like a phone ringing on a Sunday morning. There are things you suspect. Then there are things you know. The distance between them is where life hides its cruelest surprises. I thought the story ended when Theo Brandt left St. Alden's under escort. I thought the worst was behind us. I was wrong. The correction arrived the next morning at 7:41. Oliver's name lit up my phone. Not Sunday, not 7:20, Friday. That was how I knew the day had teeth. "Dad," he said, "I need you to come into London." "What happened?" "Lydia's solicitor contacted Priya last night." "And?" "She wants to meet." "No. She asked for you specifically." I said nothing. Oliver continued. Her exact words were, "Malcolm Wren needs to be there. He is the only one who will understand what I am about to say." I stood in my kitchen in Richmond, looking out at the small garden Beatrice had planted the year Oliver was born. There was a robin on the fence. I had filled the feeder that morning without remembering doing it. "What time?" I asked. We met at Oliver's office near Threadneedle Street. Wrenbridge Capital occupied the 6th floor of a limestone building that had survived 2 wars and several recessions, which made it a suitable place for uncomfortable truths. The conference room looked over the city. Glass, gray carpet, expensive silence. Priya sat at one end of the table with a notebook open and a face that suggested she had already decided the emotional parts of this meeting were professionally inconvenient. Oliver sat at the head. I sat beside him. Lydia arrived at 9 exactly. She looked different, not ruined. Lydia did not do ruined, but stripped down. No widow's black, no carefully placed grief, no audience-ready softness, just a woman carrying something heavy enough to change her posture. She sat opposite Oliver. Then she looked at me. "Thank you for coming, Malcolm." "You asked for me." "Yes." She folded her hands on the table. For once, they were not perfectly still. "I need to tell you something," she said. "And I need both of you to let me finish before you speak." Oliver said nothing. So did I. Lydia took a breath. "My full name," she said, "is Lydia Sayer Ashford." The room remained silent. "My father was Edmund Sayer. He ran a private pension fund in Bristol in the late 90s and early 2000s. 43 clients, teachers, nurses, shop owners, people who trusted him." My hands went cold. "In 2008, she continued, the fund collapsed. He was charged with fraud. The prosecution relied heavily on expert financial testimony." She opened a folder and slid a photograph across the table. It was a press photograph. Old, grainy, a courtroom shot. A man on the witness stand, younger by nearly 2 decades, answering questions with the confidence of someone who knew the numbers and had no reason to fear them. I knew that man. I saw him every morning in the mirror. Oliver picked up the photograph. Then he looked at me. I did not move. Let me tell you something about 2008. The Sayer case was not the largest case of my career. Not the most complicated, not the most famous. I was a forensic accountant for 35 years. I followed money through false companies, bad books, hidden accounts, and the cheerful lies of men who believed decimals could save them. The Sayer case was simple. The fraud was real. The evidence was clear. My testimony was accurate. Edmund Sayer went to prison for 6 years. I did not lose sleep over that. What I did not know was that he had a daughter, 17 years old, a girl who lost her home, her university savings, her father, and her name in one winter. A girl who would spend the next 16 years turning grief into architecture. I looked at Lydia. How long? I asked. She held my gaze. I found out who you were 5 years before I met Oliver. I found out about Wrenbridge after that. I began planning 18 months before the conference in Manchester. Oliver made a sound, not a word. A small, involuntary sound. The kind a man makes when pain arrives from a direction he never guarded. The original plan, Lydia said, was to take from your family what I believed yours had taken from mine. I said nothing. My father's clients lost everything, she continued. I calculated what they lost. I calculated what the money might have earned over time. I told myself I was correcting a balance. That was the plan, Oliver said. His voice was quiet. Lydia looked at him. Then her composure cracked. Not dramatically, just a small fracture near the eyes, a breath that failed to leave cleanly. Yes, she said. That was the plan. She looked down at her hands. I did not plan on you. Oliver remained still. I did not plan on loving you, she said. I did not want to. I fought it. Then I used it. Then I hated myself for using it. Then I kept going because stopping meant admitting what I had become. Priya did not write that down. I respected her for it. I am not asking for forgiveness, Lydia said. I know better than that. I know what I did. I know what the law will do with it. I have given Priya and the authorities everything. Theo, the accounts, the structure, every transfer. Then why are you here? Oliver asked. Lydia looked at me. Because he needed to know it started with him, not with you. The words were plain, almost merciful. You were supposed to be a root, she said to Oliver, a door, a means. You became a person. That is not an excuse. It may make it worse, but it is true. Oliver looked at the photograph again. His father on a witness stand. His wife across a table. His life caught between two old consequences. Then he asked the only question that mattered. Did you love me? Lydia closed her eyes. When she opened them, there was no performance left. Yes, she said. Not at first, but yes. Oliver set the photograph down carefully, as if sudden movement might break something that had not already been broken. We left shortly after. Oliver did not want to stay in the city. He came with me to Richmond. He sat in my passenger seat the way he had as a boy, looking out of the window while London slid past us in wet November light. Neither of us spoke until we were halfway over the bridge. Did you know? He asked. About her father? Yes. No. If you had known? I would have told you, I said. Then I would have watched you make your own mistake. He almost laughed. It died quickly. You think I still would have married her? I considered lying. I did not. Yes. He nodded slowly. Because the part she used was real, I said. That is why it hurt. He looked out at the river. She was 17. I know. When you testified, she was 17. Her father stole from people who trusted him. I know that too. I told the truth. I know. His voice was tired. I am not saying you were wrong, Dad. I am saying she was 17. That is a long time to carry a ruin. I kept both hands on the wheel. Yes, I said, it is. We drove the rest of the way in silence. At home, I made coffee. Oliver sat at the same kitchen table where he had first shown me the folder. This time he drank from the cup, both hands around it, like he needed the warmth. I will be all right, he said eventually. I looked at my son, 39 years old, betrayed by his wife, betrayed by his own kindness, still upright. I know, I said, and I did. Not because I was optimistic, because I had evidence. I had watched him become himself, the broken versions, the stubborn versions, the boy with the bleeding knee, the man in the coffin, the son who still called. Sunday, I said. He looked up. 7:20. He nodded. I know. Do not be late. He called at 7:18. For Oliver, that was practically reckless. I was already at the kitchen table, coffee made, morning light low across the garden, the robin back on the fence. Morning, Dad, he said. Morning, son. And we talked for 40 minutes about nothing important, which meant we talked about everything. Theo Brandt pleaded guilty 11 months later to fraud-related charges. He received a custodial sentence that his barrister described as fortunate, which tells you enough about the evidence against him. Lydia Sayer Ashford cooperated fully. Her sentence was reduced. She was barred permanently from financial work. Restitution was ordered. She moved back to Bristol and disappeared into a quieter life than the one she had tried to steal. Oliver sent her a letter 6 months after the proceedings ended. I do not know what it said. I did not ask. Some things belong only to the people who survived them. Wrenbridge Capital did not collapse. It bent. Then it strengthened. Oliver spent the following year rebuilding trust with the patience of a man who understood that money is not the hardest thing to recover. Confidence is. Clients stayed. Some even sent notes. One retired headmistress from Bath sent him a fruitcake. He called me that night genuinely confused. A woman sent me a fruitcake, Dad. That is what people do. Why? Because they cannot repair the wound, so they send food to stand beside it. A pause. It is actually quite good. Write her a note. I will. By hand. Another pause. Yes, Dad. I think about Edmund Sayer sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. A man who made choices, real choices, choices that harmed real people, choices that sent him to prison and left his daughter standing in the wreckage, young enough to be shaped by it and old enough to remember every detail. I think about Lydia, a girl who turned grief into a weapon and aimed it at the wrong man. Then, somewhere between aim and impact, discovered the weapon had cut her too. I think about Theo Brandt leaning over me in a church and whispering cruelty into what he believed was a safe silence. He thought he was the most powerful man in the room. He was not. He was not even close. My name is Malcolm Wren. I am 68 years old. I have a ruined shoulder, a decent Scotch collection, and a garden my wife planted the year our son was born. I have buried 2 people I loved. I have watched my son sit up in his own coffin, straighten his jacket, and say hello as if he had not just given me the strangest and finest moment of my life. I have learned that justice and consequence are related, but not twins. I have learned that truth does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it coughs from inside a coffin. Sometimes it sits across a conference table and says, I did love you. Sometimes it rings at 7:18 on a Sunday morning, and you answer. Because the most important things are rarely the dramatic ones. They are not the courtrooms, not the arrests, not the polished oak coffin in a London church. They are the calls, the ordinary calls, the 40 minutes about rain and roof repairs, and whether the neighbor's dog has become a public menace. They are the cup of coffee waiting before the phone rings. They are the bird feeder you keep filling long after you forget why, until one morning you look up and see something small and living return. If this story stayed with you, subscribe, like, and join us for the next one. People always think betrayal begins with a grand decision. It rarely does. Usually it begins with a small permission, a lie forgiven too early, a silence mistaken for peace, a person standing close enough to hurt you while smiling like family.